You get nothing, Terrence, not 1 cent. My father finally saw you for exactly what you are. Mrs. Langford, please, let me finish reading. 8 years. 8 years this man let my father carry him and called it a marriage. Mrs. Langford, there is a second page. I don't need a second page. I know what my father meant to leave behind. It was never him. Are you certain about that? We're done here. I watched her declare victory over a document she hadn't finished reading. She pulled it out of a 71-year-old man's shaking hands, ended our marriage in front of 9 witnesses, and looked around that room like a woman counting things she already owned. Nobody stopped her. Nobody in that room knew what her father had done. Neither did I. She was right about the first page. She just never asked why a dying man would pay a lawyer to write a second one, and then make sure his own daughter didn't know it existed. Stay with this one to the end, and if stories like this are why you're here, subscribing takes 2 seconds and keeps them coming. I knew Wendell Langford for 12 years, and in all that time I never saw the man leave a single thing half-finished. Not a repair, not a contract, not a conversation he'd started and didn't like where it went. He closed things. That was the whole of him. So when the room went still, and Nolan Prescott reached across the table for the page she'd taken out of his hands, some part of me already understood that whatever came next, Wendell had finished it before he died. My name is Terrence Duvall. I'm 44 years old. I fix cars. I built my shop out of a toolbox my uncle left me and half a pickup truck I owned with a man who moved to Tulsa and never asked for his half back. 4 bays by the end, 6 guys on the floor. 21 years of my life in a building that smelled like brake cleaner and burnt coffee, and I knew every inch of it the way you know a person. I sold it 8 years ago. Nobody in the Langford family ever asked me why. That's worth saying plainly because in 8 years of dinners and galas and Christmases in a house with 2 staircases, not one person at that table ever asked me what happened to my shop. The money from the sale went into an account I'd had since I was 26 years before I ever met Adrienne. It sat there for about 4 months. Then it was gone. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She never asked me directly. Adrienne didn't ask questions she thought she already knew the answer to. But she watched the balance go flat, and she drew the conclusion that a woman like her draws about a man like me. That I'd put it into something I didn't understand and lost it. And that was where the joke started. She had a line she used at parties. She'd put a hand on my shoulder, warm as anything, and tell people I'd retired early by marrying well. People laughed. I laughed. I laughed it was easier than the truth, and the truth wasn't mine to hand out at a cocktail table. She told that joke for 8 years. I never corrected her once. Here's the only thing I'll tell you about our marriage, and then I'll stop because everything else was noise. 3 times Adrienne booked a table for 3. 3 times before my son could sit down, the waiter came and cleared the 3rd place setting away. The plate, the glass, the folded napkin, the way you tidy a mistake. 3 times she watched it happen. 3 times she didn't call them back. She just smiled and ordered. My son's name is Silas. He was 13 that spring. He's mine from before his mother and I were done by the time he was 4, and it's been the 2 of us ever since, which is a sentence people say like it's sad. It never was. Silas started losing the hearing in his left ear when he was 11. It went slowly at first, then it stopped going slowly. That spring, a specialist put a scan up on a screen and told me there was a window. 11 weeks. After that, the procedure that would help him stopped being the procedure that would help him and became something else with worse odds. Insurance called it elective. I read the letter 4 times looking for the word that would change, and it didn't change. $60,000. 11 weeks. I'd sold the shop. There was nothing left with my name on the deed to borrow against. I filled out the hospital forms that afternoon at the kitchen counter. There's a line on those forms for every adult in a child's life, and next to Adrienne's name in the box for her relationship to him, the system gave me 3 choices and then a 4th. I checked other. It's a small thing. It's a box on a form. I noticed it for about 2 seconds and then I kept writing. Silas had started faking it by then. I don't know how long he'd been doing it before I caught it. He'd turn his head at the right moment, nod on the beat, laugh a half second after everyone else, which is the tell if you're looking for it, and I hadn't been looking for it. One night at dinner, I said something to the wall on purpose with my back to him. He answered. He answered something I hadn't said. "You don't have to do that with me, bud." He shrugged and told me he wasn't doing anything. Then he turned his head just slightly so his right ear was pointed at me and waited for my answer. 13 years old, and he'd already built himself a system. I didn't tell anyone about the 11 weeks. Not Adrienne, not Wendell, not the guys I still drank a beer with on Thursdays. I've thought about that a great deal since. I've thought about how differently everything might have gone if I'd been the kind of man who says the thing out loud. Wendell's diagnosis came in April. He didn't announce it. He mentioned it the way you mention weather in the middle of a conversation about something else, and then he went back to the something else. That was the only way that man ever delivered bad news sideways at speed so you couldn't stop and look at it. I started driving him to his appointments about 2 weeks after that. Not because Adrienne asked me to. She didn't ask me to. He called the house one evening and told me the parking structure at the hospital turned him around, that he'd come out of an elevator on the wrong level twice and stood there like a fool. It became a routine. I'd pick him up at 7:40. He'd bring a folder of project reports and read them in the waiting room with a pen in his hand marking things, and we wouldn't talk. Wendell didn't use words to fill silence. Early on, I'd tried to fill it for both of us, and he'd let me patiently the way you let a dog run itself tired. I stopped trying. That's when he started talking. Twice that summer, he gave me an address without giving me a destination. The first time, he told me to turn left 2 blocks before the hospital exit, and then kept giving me directions 1 turn at a time, like a man reading a map he didn't want me to see. We ended up in a flat stretch of light industrial on the east side. Older buildings, chain fence, a low brick shop with a roll-up door and no sign on it at all. He got out. He was in there maybe 10 minutes. He came back, put on his seatbelt, and said we could go. I didn't ask. It wasn't mine to ask. The second time was 6 weeks later, and he didn't even bother with the directions. He just said the same place, and I drove there without a word because I knew the way. 10 minutes again. Same door, same nothing on his face when he came back out. There was a drawer beside his bed at the hospital that he kept things in. Reading glasses, a roll of antacids, a pen he liked. One afternoon, he asked me to get the glasses, and I pulled the drawer open, and there was an envelope lying flat at the bottom of it, cream-colored, unsealed, with 1 word written across the front of it in his handwriting. Silas. I handed him the glasses, he put them on, the drawer closed. I brought Silas along on one of those drives near the end of June. Wendell was in the front, I was driving, and my son was in the back seat with a book he wasn't reading. He asked me something. I answered him. He asked me the same thing again about 2 minutes later, the exact same question, word for word, and I answered it again. And then a third time. I didn't correct him. You don't correct a kid for that. You just answer. Wendell didn't turn around. He didn't say anything. He looked straight out through the windshield for the rest of that drive, all the way back to the house, and when he got out, he thanked me for the ride the way he always did. The company threw a gala in July. 28 years of Langford Industrial, a ballroom downtown, 600 people who all knew each other. I came in through the front with my tie already loose because it had been 94 degrees in the parking garage, and a young woman at the check-in table looked up at me and asked me very kindly, very politely, whether I was there with a delivery. No, ma'am, she apologized. She was embarrassed and she meant it, and she found my name on the list quickly and handed me a card with my table number on it and told me to enjoy my evening. Adrienne was standing about 10 feet away with her back to us, laughing at something a man in a gray suit had said. I put the card in my jacket pocket and went and found my table. There was a dinner at the house in August. 6 people, one of them a financial consultant named Colin Radley, who'd worked for Langford Industrial years back and still turned up at the table sometimes, the way certain people do. Adrienne had a contract in front of her, an operating agreement on one of the maintenance divisions, a thing she'd read on her own on a weekend because nobody had asked her to. She laid out what it was costing them month over month, and she was clear and quick about it, and she did not raise her voice. Wendell told her that division had been running that way for 11 years and it would keep running that way, and he said it in front of everyone, and then he asked somebody to pass the bread. The contract was in Radley's hands by the time the plates were cleared. Adrienne didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. She was pleasant. She refilled glasses. She laughed in the right places. She was right, and he didn't listen. I want that on the record because of everything that came after. She was right, and he didn't listen to her. 3 days before he died, Wendell called the house and asked for me, not for his daughter, for me. He asked me to come alone. When I got to the room, he was sitting up, and that frightened me more than anything else I saw that week. He'd been going down fast. Men don't come back up like that for free. They come back up because something got paid for. He looked tired in a very particular way, the way a man looks when he's made a decision that cost him and he's already finished arguing with himself about it. He reached over to the tray table and picked something up and put it in my hand and closed my fingers around it. It was a key. A roll-up door key, old brass, the teeth worn down almost smooth on one side from 30 years of turning in the same lock. Hold this. I waited for the rest of the sentence. It didn't come. I told him I didn't understand. He looked at the window for a while, long enough that I thought he'd gone somewhere else, and then he said the last real thing he ever said to me. When this is over, don't listen to what she tells you she is. Watch what she does the hour she thinks she's already won. I asked him what that meant. I asked him twice. Nolan will know when. And that was the end of it. He asked me whether the Buick was still burning oil. I said it was. We talked about the Buick for 6 or 7 minutes, and then a nurse came in, and I put the key in my jacket pocket, and I went home. Wendell Langford died at 5 in the morning on a Tuesday. Adrienne wasn't in the room. I wasn't either. I'd gone home the night before because he'd told me to, and I took the call standing at my kitchen counter in the dark with my hand flat on the cold laminate, and then I sat down at the table and didn't move for a long time. I had a key in my jacket that opened a door I'd never been through, and a sentence in my head I couldn't make sense of, and no idea at all that a document existed. Nolan Prescott called me 2 days after the funeral. He'd handled the family's legal work for 19 years. I knew who he was. I'd shaken his hand at 4 Christmases, but I had never had a single conversation with the man that wasn't about the weather. "Mr. Duvall, there's something you need to hear before the reading." His voice had a tremor in it that I later learned was not nerves. I stood in my hallway with the phone against my ear, and I thought about Wendell saying, "Nolan will know when." And I thought about the word when and how carefully that man had always chosen his words. Then it'll still be true on the day of the reading. He didn't argue. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "All right," and hung up. I want to be honest about something. I have gone back to that phone call more times than I can count. The following week, Adrienne filed a formal objection with the firm that the attorney administering her father's trust had made private contact with an individual who was not a named beneficiary. She was within her rights. It was a legitimate complaint. It was, in fact, correct. After that, Nolan Prescott was not permitted to speak to me at all. And there was one more thing. When I asked why we were waiting almost 8 weeks for the reading, Prescott's office told me the date had been fixed in writing by Wendell himself and could not be moved forward. Adrienne had already tried. She'd been told no in a letter. A dead man had put a date on a calendar and locked it. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Act 2. Adrienne ran her father's funeral the way she ran everything, which is to say competently, on schedule, and without visible strain. I saw the guest list on the desk in the study because it was lying face up and I was looking for a pen. Names in columns grouped by category: board, executive, extended family. My name was under family. My son's name was under other. I asked her about it that evening and she explained kindly, patiently, without a trace of anything sharp in her voice, that the funeral home software only offered a handful of categories and that somebody had to be put somewhere. She was telling the truth. That's what I've never been able to get past. Every word of it was true. At the entrance on the day, a man in a headset stopped me on the steps and asked me where the flower van was parked. I told him where it was parked. Then I went inside and sat in the second row. 9 days after the funeral, Adrienne put a folder on the kitchen table in front of me and sat down across from it with her hands folded. $60,000, wired within 48 hours of signature. The tax treatment already worked out and printed on the second page, so I wouldn't have to wonder about it. In exchange, I would sign a waiver relinquishing any and all future interest, present, contingent, or expectant, in the Langford family trust. She had already retained an independent attorney for me, paid for. His card was clipped to the inside cover. She told me to call him to take as long as I wanted, and that she would not raise it again unless I did. I'm not asking you to choose between us and your son. I'm removing the choice. She said it gently. She meant it gently. She slid the folder an inch toward me with 2 fingers, and then took her hand back and left it there, and got up and went to answer her phone in the other room. I sat in that kitchen for a long while with a folder in front of me that would fix the only problem in my life that mattered. I didn't open it. I'll think about it. That's all I said to her about it that night or any night. And here is the part I couldn't have explained to anyone, including myself. I wasn't refusing on principle. I don't have that kind of spine. I was refusing because a dying man had put a key in my hand and told me to wait, and I couldn't shake the feeling that signing my name to anything before I understood why would be a kind of answer to a question nobody had asked me yet. 11 weeks had become 6. 2 days later, I drove out to the east side with the key in my pocket. I don't know what I expected. I think I expected a door. What was actually there was a chain-link gate across the whole lot, with a security lock on it, company hardware, the same brand that hung on every Langford yard in the state, and a man in a booth who came out with a clipboard and asked me who I was with. I'm his son-in-law. He was very decent about it. He said he wasn't allowed to take that. He said he'd need something showing I had authority over Langford industrial property, a badge, a letter, an authorization number, anything with a signature on it. I stood on the wrong side of a fence with a key in my hand that opened a door I couldn't get within 200 feet of, and then I got back in my truck and drove home. She never asked me to leave the bedroom. I want to be precise about that because people always assume there was a fight. She handed me a printout. A proposed division of personal property, prepared to simplify the estate tax filing with the places I needed to initial, already marked in light pencil. And she mentioned on her way past that the room at the end of the hall had been made up. I carried what I needed down the hall. There was no argument to report. There was a document and a hallway and a made-up bed. Here's what I got wrong. I decided Adrienne was stealing from the pension fund. I want to say it plainly because I've had to sit with it. I built the whole theory in about 4 days out of nothing but the way she'd looked at a spreadsheet once, and by the end of that week, I was certain enough that I drove down to the yard on Peel Street to prove it. Marisol Vega has run that warehouse for 30 years. In 8 years around that company, she was the only person in the entire operation who called me Terry instead of Mrs. Langford's husband, and she did it the first day, and she never once thought about it. I told her what I wanted. 3 years of payroll and contribution records. She looked at me for a second, and then went and got them. I sat with those numbers for 2 nights at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a calculator, and I ran every quarter twice. The fund was whole. Every dollar, every match, every filing on time for 3 straight years. I came in here ready to call her a thief. Marisol didn't tell me it was all right. She didn't tell me I'd meant well. She pulled a logbook out of the drawer under the counter and started turning pages. What she said was this: nobody comes to the yard at 6 in the morning. The records annex behind the main warehouse holds the land files, deeds, surveys, easements, 40 years of paper on every parcel Langford Industrial had ever touched. Nobody had signed into that room since 2019. It's a room for lawyers, and lawyers don't come at 6. Somebody had signed in 3 times in 1 month. All 3 before 7 a.m., all 3 in the 4 weeks before Wendell died. She put the book on the counter and turned it around so I could read it. The signature wasn't Adrienne's. Silas was sitting on the 3rd stair when I got home that night in the dark, with his elbows on his knees. He'd picked up the extension. He'd heard 40 seconds of a call with the hospital's billing office, and 40 seconds was plenty. He didn't fake anything this time. He turned his head so his good ear was facing me, and he looked right at me while he said it, which is how I knew he'd been practicing the sentence. We can wait a year. I already looked it up. People wait. He said it evenly, 13 years old, sitting in the dark, offering me a way out of the only thing I'd been unable to solve for him. You're 13. Waiting isn't something you get to volunteer for. He nodded and went upstairs, and I heard his door, and I stood at the bottom of those stairs for a while with my keys still in my hand. That night I got the folder out of the drawer in the hall. I opened it to the signature page, and I put a pen down next to it, and I sat in that kitchen for 40 minutes. $60,000, 48 hours, a line, and my name. I closed it and put it back in the drawer. I never told a living soul I'd taken it out. The signature in that logbook belonged to Colin Radley. It took me 2 days to find him and about 90 seconds to understand that finding him hadn't been difficult on purpose. He agreed to coffee. He picked the place. He got there first. He didn't deny anything. That's what I wasn't ready for. I'd driven over there with a version of the conversation in my head where he lied to me, and instead he sat there and renamed every single thing I put in front of him. 3 unlogged visits to a records annex became preliminary diligence. A month of it before the old man died became ordinary preparation. A daughter pulling deeds on parcels her father was still alive to sell became a client familiarizing herself with her own family's holdings. Then he asked me what I did for a living, and I told him, and he nodded like it confirmed something pleasant, and he offered me a referral fee. He used that phrase, referral fee, for not complicating things. Nobody here is a villain, Mr. Duvall. There's a transaction and a very short window. And then, because he thought he was the only person at that table who understood what was happening, he explained the window to me. The parcel was 91 acres on the north side the ground that sat against 3 active development contracts and anchored by itself about 400 jobs. Adrienne wasn't selling it for the money. She didn't need the money. She was selling it because a fund several times the size of Langford Industrial had made her a seat on its board conditional on delivering that ground into a deal that closed this year. Her father's company was not the prize. It was the ticket in. I left a full cup of coffee and enough cash for both of us on the table and walked out. 11 days later, I filed a petition for a temporary restraining order against the transfer of the north parcel. I did it with a lawyer who charged me $800 I didn't have and told me my odds were poor. It was granted. It was granted on a Thursday morning, and I read the notice standing in my driveway, and I had to read it 3 times. That night, I slept 6 straight hours, first time in 2 months. I told Silas about it Friday over eggs, and I was careful with it. I didn't say it was over. I said there was a judge involved now, and that judges take a long time, and that I'd know more soon. He asked me if it meant we were going to be okay. I looked at my son across a kitchen table and I told him yes. I've replayed that morning more than any other part of this. Not the conference room, not the funeral. That kitchen and the word yes, and the way his shoulders came down about an inch when I said it. It was vacated the following Monday, not overturned on the merits. Nobody ever looked at the merits. It was vacated because the petitioner me lacked standing to bring it. I wasn't a shareholder. I wasn't a beneficiary. I wasn't an officer, a director, a trustee, or a creditor. I had no legal relationship to Langford Industrial of any kind. On paper, I was nobody. That's not a feeling. That's the finding. I called the lawyer and asked him what we do next, and he was decent enough not to soften it. He said there was no next. He said standing isn't an argument you make better. It's a door you're either through or you aren't, and that the $800 had bought me a ruling that would now be cited against me by anyone who cared to look. Then he asked carefully whether there was any chance of a settlement with my wife. I told him there was an offer on the table. He said that in his professional opinion, I should take it. He was right. Every attorney I've described this to since has said the same thing, and every one of them has been right. I drove home, and I didn't take it, and I could not have told you why. That's the honest state of me in the last week of September, a man with no case, no money, a countdown on his son, and nothing in his pocket but a piece of brass. Adrienne came home that evening with a list. Not a cruel list. A tidy one, typed alphabetized items belonging to the family that would need to be returned as part of the separation. Cufflinks. A watch of her father's I'd never worn. A set of luggage. She put it on the table between us and asked me if there was anything else of theirs I was holding. I took the key out of my jacket pocket and pushed it across the table toward her. Old brass. Teeth worn smooth. It slid about 8 inches and stopped in front of her hands. She looked at it. She looked at it for a good 3 or 4 seconds, and I watched her, and I understood what I was watching. That isn't ours. She pushed it back and picked her list up off the table and went upstairs. She had no idea what it opened. 8 years. And that was the first time in 8 years I knew something she didn't. 2 weeks left. I drove to Nolan Prescott's office and sat in the reception area for 2 hours without an appointment, and at 4:45, a woman came out and told me apologetically on her feet, not sitting down, that Mr. Prescott was not permitted to meet with me prior to the reading. There was a complaint on file. Whose complaint? She said she wasn't permitted to answer that either. I drove home. 2 weeks until the window closed on my son's ear. 10 days until a reading of a will that had nothing in it for me. I had run out of moves, all of them, every single one. Act 3. On the morning of the reading, Adrienne wore a black suit she had not worn to the funeral. I noticed it because the funeral suit had been softer, a little loose in the shoulder, the kind of thing a woman wears when she expects to be looked at with sympathy. This one was cut hard and sat square, and it was the kind of thing you wear when you expect to be taken seriously by a room full of people who are watching to see whether you belong at the head of a table. She checked herself in the hall mirror twice, not for vanity, for accuracy. She didn't speak to me on the drive down. Prescott's conference room was on the top floor of a building Wendell used to describe as deliberately unimpressive. 9 of us, Prescott, Adrienne, me. 3 directors who'd been with the company more than 20 years each, 2 cousins with small interests in the trust, a paralegal by the door who never sat down. Prescott laid the document flat on the table before he began and slid it into position with the sides of both hands and then read from it where it lay without picking up. His hands were on the tabletop the entire time. He never lifted the paper once. I'd known him 19 years and I'd never seen him do that before. Page 1 was what page 1 always is. Her mother's jewelry itemized, a cash fund, the property on the coast, a short list of personal effects described in the flat catalog language of estates. Adrienne nodded after each item. Not in grief. The way you nod at a delivery driver reading off a manifest. Prescott finished the last line of page 1 and put 2 fingers on the corner of the sheet to turn it. She reached across the table and took the document out of his hands. They were shaking. They had been shaking for 2 years, and every person in that room knew it, and she pulled a piece of paper out from between them and stood up with it. You get nothing, Terrence, not 1 cent. My father finally saw you for exactly what you are. Mrs. Langford, please. Let me finish reading. 8 years. 8 years this man let my father carry him and called it a marriage. Mrs. Langford, there is a second page. I don't need a second page. I know what my father meant to leave behind. It was never him. She turned to me and told me our marriage was over. She said it clearly in front of 9 people without any particular heat in it, the way you close out an account. She told me to have my things out of the house by Friday. Are you certain about that? We're done here. Nobody said a word. One of the directors was studying the tabletop. The paralegal by the door had gone very still. I didn't say anything either. Not because I had a plan. I want to be clear about that because of how this looks from the outside. I didn't have anything. I had 2 weeks no money, no standing, and a key to a gate I couldn't get through. I let her finish because a man I'd driven to the hospital 30 times had told me to watch what she did in the hour she believed she'd already won. And she was doing it, and I still didn't know why he'd wanted me to see it. When she stopped, she sat back down and asked Prescott quite civilly whether there was anything further. Prescott held out his hand. She looked at it. Then she put the document into it. He laid it flat again. He squared it with the sides of both hands. He turned to the second page. Yes, there is. Wendell had not divided the company. He had not split control between his daughter and a board committee, or set up a succession schedule, or done any of the 4 or 5 sensible things that 8 decades of estate lawyers have invented for exactly this situation. What he had done was transfer the voting rights of the family trust, the mechanism through which Langford Industrial is actually controlled, to me. For 10 years. Not ownership. I want that understood because it's the whole shape of the thing. I owned nothing. I could not sell any portion of the company or any asset of it for my own benefit ever, under any circumstance. I drew no salary from the trust. I could not borrow against it. I was to protect the company, protect the people employed by it, and preserve the strategic holdings that represented 40 years of a man's working life. In the document, in his own words, he named me the custodian of it. Not the heir, the custodian. Adrienne would continue to receive her distributions. Her security was never touched, not $1 of it. She simply would not have her hands on the wheel. And then Prescott read one more line and set the page down flat on the table and took his hands off it. A legacy handed to someone who sees it as a trophy is not inherited. It's cashed. Nobody in that room moved. Somewhere below us, a truck went through a gear on the street. I had never heard of the second page. I had never seen a draft, never been told it existed, never been in a room where it was discussed. The confusion on my face was not a performance, and there were 3 men at that table who had known me long enough to tell the difference. She was on her feet again before Prescott had finished squaring the page. She said I had worked a dying man for 4 months, that I had driven him to appointments so I'd have him alone in a car, that every hour I'd spent in a waiting room had been an hour spent building this. She said it fast and clean, and I understood listening to her that she had rehearsed some version of it a long time ago as a contingency and had never expected to need it. I said one thing in that room. One. This it. He never asked me for anything. That's how I knew what he was. Then I stopped talking, and I didn't start again. Prescott let the silence sit for a moment. Then he opened the folder in front of him and began in the flattest voice a man can use to close every door in the building. 2 independent psychiatric evaluations conducted 6 weeks apart by physicians with no prior relationship to the family, no referral from the firm, and no shared institution between them. Both filed before execution, both unqualified. The entire signing recorded on video, time-stamped, 2 witnesses on camera, the full document read aloud on the recording. And I had not been in the building, not in the room, not in the waiting area, not in the parking structure. There is a badge log for that floor, and my name is not on it on that day or any day near it. Prescott said all of that without emphasis, the way a man says things he was asked to prepare months in advance for a moment he'd been told specifically would come. Then he looked up at me and his voice changed, and he said something that had nothing to do with the will. Had you signed her waiver, Mr. Duval, page 2 would have died the moment I read it. He wrote it knowing she would try. He didn't say it like a man delivering good news. He said it the way you'd report the outcome of an argument you'd lost. And I understood, watching his face, that he had told Wendell not to do it that way. That he'd said it was too fine a margin. That he'd been overruled. 40 minutes. A pen on a kitchen table. $60,000 and my son's ear. I had come within about 4 inches of ending it myself, and I had not had one single reason for stopping that I could have explained to anybody. Prescott put a second envelope on the table. Inside it was a photocopy of a cashier's check dated 8 years earlier. $340,000. Every dollar I got from my shop. Wendell hadn't asked me for it. He didn't know about it. That's the part that has to land right, or none of the rest of it means anything. In the second year of my marriage, Langford Industrial hit a liquidity problem, the kind that never makes a press release and quietly threatens to unwind everything a man has spent his life building. I found out the way people in trades find things out. A supplier stopped being paid on time, and the supplier told his brother, and his brother worked for me. I moved the money through a mutual contact. I didn't sign anything. I told the contact not to use my name, and he didn't. Wendell traced it back about 9 months later. He never said one word to me about it. Not that year, not in the 7 after, not in a hospital room 3 days before he died. He just kept the ledger entry. For 8 years, in an envelope with a lawyer. Adrienne sat down. Not because she'd lost the argument. She'd lost the argument 4 minutes earlier. She sat down because she was doing the arithmetic on 8 years of a joke she'd told at parties, with her hand on my shoulder, a joke about a man who'd retired early by marrying well, and she was working out that she had told it over and over in front of somebody who knew the exact figure and had never once corrected her. I'd like to tell you that what I felt then was some kind of victory. It wasn't. It was closer to the particular sadness of finding out all at once exactly how much a man had seen and how long he'd carried it by himself. There was a third envelope, cream-colored, unsealed, one word across the front of it in his handwriting. Silas. I knew that envelope. I had seen it lying flat in a drawer at the bottom of a nightstand, between a roll of antacids and a pen he liked to, and I had handed him his reading glasses and closed the drawer on it, and never thought about it again. Inside was a fund, established for my son in his name entirely outside the trust, separate corpus, separate trustee not listed in any schedule Adrienne had ever been shown, because it had never been hers to be shown. Education first. And then a second clause added later, in an amendment executed in the last month of his life, care and medical provision dispersible immediately at the trustee's discretion without cause shown. I asked Prescott when it had been created. He checked. Spring of last year, he said, the week after a dinner where a table had been booked for 3. Adrienne asked him one question, just the date. She asked him to repeat the date, and he repeated it, and she wrote nothing down. Then she gathered her papers and stood and left the room before he had finished reading the clause. She did not say anything on her way out, not to him, not to me. I turned my chair toward the window. I'm not going to describe that part. A man is allowed one of those. When I could, I got up and filled a glass of water from the pitcher on the credenza and set it down on the table in front of Nolan Prescott next to his hands. Then I picked up my son's envelope and went out into the hall. She filed the challenge 2 weeks later. Undue influence, lack of capacity, the usual architecture. She withdrew it 3 months after that. I found out through a 2-line notice forwarded from Prescott's office. No conditions, no statement. Colin Radley had retained his own counsel and turned over the entire email record, every draft, every timeline, the whole plan dated and sitting there in writing months before Wendell died. Her father had already closed the window on the sale. What nobody could prove was intent until Radley decided he'd rather be a witness than a party. He started looking for a lawyer 3 days after I left a cup of coffee on a table. I wasn't in the room for any of it. I never spoke to her again. I signed the cancellation on the north parcel on a Tuesday morning. 400 jobs, 1 signature, about 90 seconds. The next morning, Marisol Vega put a ladder up against the front of the yard office on Peel Street and re-hung the old shop sign that had come down in 2016 when somebody in marketing decided it looked dated. Silas had his procedure in the last week of the window. It went the way we'd been told it might go if we made the window. That's all I'll say about it. In October, I drove out to the east side. Marisol was waiting at the gate with the security key on her belt, and she pulled the chain back and swung it open and stood aside and didn't make a thing of it. The building is low brick, 41 years old, with a roll-up door and no sign on it at all. I put the worn brass key into the lock and turned it and pushed the door up. It went up the way those doors go, heavy for the first foot, then all at once light all the way to the top. Inside was the first shop. The original floor oil black in a 2-foot circle where a machine had stood for 30 years, and the machine itself still standing in it. A workbench with the vise still bolted down, tools on a pegboard with their outlines painted behind them so you'd know where they went. And on the back wall, hung with 2 nails and no frame, a photograph of Wendell Langford at 36, standing next to that machine with his hand flat on it, looking into the camera like a man who has just committed to something very large and is at peace about it. Silas came in behind me. He stood next to me and looked up at the picture for a while. Then he turned his head so his good ear was toward me and asked me the only thing he'd ever wanted to know about that man. Did he know my name? I didn't answer him. I took the envelope out of my jacket and put it in his hands. Some men don't leave you what they own. They leave you what they know about the people you'll have to survive. If this one stayed with you, subscribe. There's a new story every week about someone who underestimated the wrong person.